A blazing fast drop-in 6502. More about this and other stories on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Happy birthday, SCUMM.
6502 FPGA.
A new Sierra-style game with EGA graphics.
And a British classic comes to the VIC-20.
All this and our community question of the week on This Week in Retro. Up-to-date news
for out-of-date tech.
Now, before we get started, some quite tragic news, although thankfully it's not as bad as it possibly could have been. Many of our listeners will be aware of the situation that hit Mark Fixes Stuff, a popular YouTuber, this weekend, and a regular in the cave. He helps me to fix an awful lot of stuff here. He's an invaluable source of help and a great friend. This weekend, I got a call from him. It was about 8:30 in the morning. I got the call from him to say that his house was on fire. And this is the house where he does all of his fixing stuff. His studio's there, all of his retros there. And this wasn't just a little bit of smoke. This was a full-on house fire. His entire house is gutted. Every piece of retro is gone. I should point out that all of his family and he are safe. That's the most important thing, of course. But as the week's gone on, he's been sharing videos. It took him a while before he was actually allowed access to the house. But now he's got in there, he's taken some videos, and boy, it is just a terrible, terrible scene. You can't identify any of the retro that's in there. I'm sure he won't mind us showing a little bit of that footage. If you want to edit that in, Duncan, that would be great. Yeah, just look at this. It's just a black, charred mess. The only thing I think that we could identify in there was just nestled away. There was this Atari console that you could still see the Atari badge on, but other than that, it's just charcoal. So really heart-wrenching scenes to see and to talk to Mark about as he got his head around it over the weekend. But from the ashes came an incredible show of support. And if you've ever doubted or lost faith in online communities amongst the trolling and the hatred that goes on, what a scene we've seen in this show of support for Mark. So what happened was our friend Mean Machine Dean set up a PayPal pot to try and raise funds to help Mark. And I think it was within 48 hours, £20,000 had been raised, which is incredible. And that's the upper limit of what you can put in one of these pots. So a second pot has now had to be set up, and it continues to grow. So from this tragedy is an incredible show of support from the retro community. You should all hold your heads up high and be proud of yourselves for the way that you've responded, because it's really helping make the difference for Mark to get his head around this and to move forward and to get Mark Fixes Stuff back up and running in the longer term. So well done, everyone. And all the links to see that and to support Mark will be in the show notes. So into our first story then, John, which is a happy birthday SCUMM. It takes a circuitous route through the news streams this week. A retro news site which I really enjoy is vintageisthenewOld.com. Is that a site you're familiar with, John?
Absolutely. They do some great stuff over there.
They do, and that's where this story came to my attention. They've covered the latest release of the popular adventure game Rejuvenator, which is, of course, SCUMM VM. It's had a new release, but it's also a massive milestone because SCUMM VM is now 20 years old. 20 years of SCUMM VM. Can you believe it, John?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remembered when I first discovered SCUMM. And it was probably around the time that it first came out. I remember everybody was talking about it online. It's a revelation to be able to play all the old LucasArts games on my MacBook or my iBook at the time with no loading or disk swapping. It was awesome. SCUMM was where I first discovered, if you can believe this, Neil, the Monkey Island games. I never played any of those games back in the day originally. And so, I mean, it was great. It was a cornucopia of goodness, gaming goodness. It was also where I first completed Maniac Mansion. So it's one of the best emulators of all time, in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. Monkey Island wouldn't have made it to your beloved NES, But you
No.
got Maniac Mansion, didn't you?
Yeah,
Got a
we
version of
we
that?
got a surprisingly competent port of Maniac Mansion, but I never finished it on the NES. I had to wait for SCUMM, and I still remember just sitting up in my bed late into the night, firing that and Monkey Island are my two biggest SCUMM memories. I just it was so much fun playing those games through SCUMM.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the project, of course, SCUMM took its name from the LucasArts game engine, which was SCUMM, but it did go on to support adventure games with all kinds of different engines over the years, including those from Sierra. So Sierra and LucasArts, they're the big two, aren't they, when you think of adventure games?
Yeah.
And then Westwood Studios, who put out some wonderful games, Origin, Delphine, that French studio who put out the likes of Operation Stealth and Future Wars.
Yeah, Future Wars is what always comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and Cruise for a Corpse as well. That was a good game from them.
Mhm.
And the thing that I really like about SCUMM is, of course, that it lets you play all of these old games really, really easily, but it doesn't chuck a huge overhead at your system to achieve that. Plenty of these old games were made originally to run on 286 PCs, for example, and I remember it must have been 10 years ago now that I had a really wonderful time playing through the Indiana Jones games again. So what was there? Last Crusade and Fate of Atlantis were the two that I really enjoyed. And I played through these using SCUMM on a 10-inch netbook computer. Do you remember those netbooks that everybody,
I used to have one
everybody
too.
hated?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So tablets were, breaking through. The iPad had shown that a tablet could work and the proper interface on a tablet could be really good. But still, Microsoft and the hardware developers were pushing these netbooks to try and compete with them as a low-cost alternative. They didn't last long, did they?
Well, what happened is that the price of really thin and light, fully functional laptops came down to the point where netbooks just couldn't stay competitive. I think also the launch of Windows 8 at the time, and all of the extra graphical add-ons and things it was poor planning on the part of Microsoft to try and launch these low-cost alternatives to tablets while not giving you an operating system that ran well on them. But they ran XP. My netbook ran XP like a champ. I mean, I used that, and I used it basically as like you said, as a portable gaming machine. It worked great.
Mm. I was talking to a friend who worked in PC World here when those were about. Pillock, I think it was. Hello, Pillock, if you're listening and watching. And he was saying that the netbooks that came with Linux pre-installed rather than Windows were the most returned item that they ever sold. It had like something like a 60% return rate just because people were unfamiliar with it. They fired it up and went, what the hell is this? Where's Microsoft Works or Microsoft Word? How do I use this? Of course, we're not going to start bashing Linux. There are plenty of alternative applications out there that achieve what people need to achieve. They're just so unfamiliar with it, they didn't know where to start. And so they just took it straight back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it all comes down to how you're communicating these things. If you're like, listen, this is an alternative to an iPad, buy it, and then they get it home and it's Linux and they don't know how to use the system, they don't recognize any applications, well, of course they're not going to like it. It's all in the communication, and that's something that the technology industry still to this day doesn't do a great job on.
Oh yeah. Well, the one I had was a Samsung NC10 netbook, which was pretty good on the scale of netbooks. I got it free with a phone contract, which was great. And if you stuck a USB mouse into it and then you installed SCUMM on it, maybe a little bit more RAM. That wasn't really necessary for SCUMM, just to speed up the operating system and make things a bit snappier. And that was a really nice, lightweight system on which to play SCUMM games. I was really, really happy with that, John.
Yeah. So does this new SCUMM 20th anniversary release bring anything new to the party?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, John, because yes, it is a big update. It's the first release with full support in SCUMM for 2.5D games. It's merged with another project called Residual VM, which is like a sister project to SCUMM, and it's been focused on the 2.5 and the 3D adventure games for many, many years. So this is big news that it's now part of SCUMM, and it means it can play one of my favorite games of all time, which is Grim Fandango. Absolutely love that game. Do you have good memories of Grim Fandango?
This is still one that I've never played, but I know tons
John.
and tons and tons of people love it. So I have to play it one of these days.
It'll be interesting to see if SCUMM brings some of the improvements that were in the Grim Fandango remastered version that came out, namely slightly improved controls, because the original game has tank controls, Resident Evil style, walking around as the the main character, Manny Calavera. Oh, it's such a great game. I want to go and play it now. So I'm going to try that out on the new version of SCUMM VM. It also brings us support for The Longest Journey, which was a great game. And one that I'm not so familiar with, Myst 3 Exile. I think I got quite a lot of Myst fatigue after the first one. I didn't really follow the series that closely. So there are these 2.5D games, which are so cool because basically your main character is polygon renders, but the background is 2D bitmaps. So you've got half and half. Think Resident Evil or Alone in the Dark style gameplay. They also added support for 10 more new game engines, some of which I've never heard of, which suggests there's a whole world of adventure games now accessible to me on modern hardware, which I want to go and explore. There are a couple that stand out, though, that I'm excited about. Little Big Adventure, that's now supported, which it's not a traditional point-and-click adventure game by any means. It's a lovely adventure, but I'm not sure there's any pointing or clicking involved. So I need to get out of my head that SCUMM VM is all about the pointing and clicking. It's all about the adventuring and the exploring. So we've got Crusader No Remorse, which was that Origin game. I don't know if you remember that. Were you a fan of LBA or Crusader, any of those?
Little Big Adventure I had never heard of. It looks neat. It's sort of a it looks more almost like Rare's Super Nintendo games where they took 3D models and they pasted some polygons on them. It has a really neat look to it. I'm gonna look more into that, but by and large, I actually hate 2.5D adventure games like Fairy Tale Adventure. That's always one that people talk about on the Amiga, or Crusader. I don't like the viewpoint. To me, the fun in point and click adventures is beautiful art, and the way that they had to make the art in these 2.5D games is to me, it just doesn't look very good, and it hasn't aged as well as the traditional pixel art of the 2D adventure games. Give me top down, give me side on, but the isometric games in the adventure genre just annoy the heck out of me.
Yeah, I'm not going to jump in with both feet on that opinion. I think Crusader is a good looking game. I get the annoyance of the tank controls on some of these games, and sometimes isometric games, they just make it more difficult to get around, don't they? You just can't get to where you want to get. But on the whole, there's still some pretty good looking ones out there, I think. I thought Crusader looked like quite a gritty game. The engine of that evolved to be used in Ultima 8. We haven't had an Ultima reference for many episodes, John. What's going on? Ultima 8. But it didn't work for me for some of the reasons I stated there. But Crusader worked better for me than Ultima 8 did. So I am interested in trying that again for sure. So if you haven't tried SCUMM VM, then please do treat yourself to a talkie version of a classic adventure game. Maybe you had something like Indiana Jones on the Amiga back in the day, and now you can enjoy the talkie version with all the extras that came with it. Some of the enhancements that SCUMM VM introduces to scale those images up and try and keep them looking nice on a modern large monitor. Make yourself a coffee, go on an adventure, and enjoy everything that SCUMM VM has to offer. A lot of the games supported really are timeless classics.
Neil, I'm going to ask you a question that is popular on first dates, I think. You sit down in a coffee shop, you're trying to get to know the young lady across from you, and you look deeply into her eyes and you ask her, what's your favorite CPU?
Oh, John, when was the last time you went on a date?
It's a miracle I got married, Neil. I'm not going to lie to you.
Well, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to completely derail this topic because I want to ask you a transcontinental question by asking you, do you have, I'm asking the big questions on the show today, do you have Greggs in the US?
We do not. I'm familiar with Greggs from my time in England, but we do not have it here.
Okay, well, that's that answered. I've got a sausage roll here waiting for me when the show ends. Right, so we're on a date. We're sharing a plate of spaghetti, Lady and the Tramp style. You lean in and you say, Neil, what's your favorite CPU? I would have to come at this from the perspective of machines that I liked that had a CPU in, because it's not like I spend any time back then or even now writing machine code and cursing the features of one CPU over the other at that low level. So I'd pick out it would have to be for me the good old Motorola 68000, just because it powered so many iconic arcades, consoles, and home machines that I love.
It's hard to go wrong with that.
Are we getting a second date?
I'd take you out again, Neil. Yeah, you're paying this time though. Well, I'm no hardware engineer either, so I can't wax poetic about the intricacies of processor design. But for my money, it's hard to beat the good old MOS Technology 6502. I mean, it basically powered my youth. Everything from the Atari 8-bit computers to my first foray into video games with the NES, and it consumed so many hours of my playtime. I just can't separate it from my personal golden age of gaming and computing. Neil, do you remember your first 6502 machine?
Ooh, interesting. It's interesting that I've gone more for the 16-bit era and you've gone with that earlier 8-bit era. But the first 6502 base machine I would have used would have been the BBC Micro, which we had in schools. My own home computer then would have been the Z80 based Amstrad CPC, and the Z80's got to be up there as another iconic CPU if we're having to pick one out. But I didn't own a BBC Micro. BBC Micros were for dorks, John.
Losers. Well, for retro computing enthusiasts who are looking to supercharge your original machines and add a little extra oomph without compromising the original architecture of your motherboards, I have some great news. There's a German engineer named Jürgen Muller, and he has utilized the power of FPGA technology to create a drop-in replacement for the 6502 chip called the 65F02. And in case you're wondering, the F, it stands for fast. And fast it is, Neil. Just to give you an idea, the original Apple II 6502 chip ran at just over 1 megahertz. Well, the 65F02 runs, at 100 times that. That's right, a 100 megahertz 6502 chip that you drop in to a whole host of machines.
That's some serious speed coming out of that 6502. I feel a little bit bad about the last thing I said now, John, which was calling BBC Micro users dorks. After the whole conversation we had last week about being freaks.
Are you a freak? Are you a weirdo? Are you a BBC Micro user?
Yeah, so sorry, I retract that statement, BBC Micro users. We're all freaks and weirdos together. So, this project kind of makes me think, do you remember the Buffy CPU people were talking about? And they're still talking about, because it's still a current project, and that's promising the 68K CPU at what they're aiming for as 100 MIPS and possibly over 1,000 megahertz, although the final stable speed is to be confirmed as they work through that beta phase of testing and ironing out any kinks. I think the minimum threshold I read that the Buffy project are going for is 400 megahertz, and then stable, and then anything above that, which I'm sure they'll achieve more than that, will be a bonus. So it raises the same questions, though, for me as that project and any other project which promises insane speeds on classic systems, which is, what do I do with it? What the hell do I do with it? I love that it exists purely for the fact that it helps to keep old systems running, but what are we going to see? I hope we see some cool demos. I hope we see some games developed that take advantage of it. But it takes a lot for good games to be developed for these old systems that will take advantage of it in the modern day. There were game studios back then. There were people dedicated full time to making games for these systems back then. So just because you've got more speed doesn't mean you're going to get a higher quality game. You still need those talents, don't you? So, do I want to do the same as I can already do, only faster? Not really, beyond the time it takes for, say, an operating system to load, for Workbench to load, for hard disk accessing speeds. Nice when that speeds up. But when you get into the game or the application, what do you need it? Do you need it? I don't know. But it's great that it exists, and it's nice actually that this is cross-platform too. I think you mentioned that, didn't you? It's a CPU for any system that uses a 6502. Can you just drop it in, John?
Well, it's not quite that easy, I think. I think that, the way that it's worked so far, Jürgen has tested the 65F02 with 2 of the 3 members of that original 1977 trinity of micros, the Apple II and the Commodore PET. So sorry, TRS-80, you should have backed the winning CPU here. It's also been tested with a number of early chess computers. And, speaking of practical applications, this is definitely something that could definitely benefit from speed increases whenever you're playing chess against a computer. And what I'm assuming is that these are standalone units, that they're sort of like they fit in your lap or on a table. And you can see the board and see maybe an LED display with the chess pieces on it. So as you can imagine, bumping up the processor speed is going to make the AI quicker in deciding their moves and allow you to play more games. So that is a practical application so far that he's done.
Yeah, that is actually a really good example. I can't remember the last time I actually played chess on my computer, John, but I do remember in the 8 and the 16-bit eras, I remember playing all kinds of chess games. The Chess Master series. I was a big fan of Battle Chess. You loved seeing all the different animations that were between the different pieces, if the queen took the pawn.
Some people think Battle Chess is the ultimate chess game that the real chess masters use. Yeah, I've heard that before, so I don't know, but I play chess a ton, especially in the late 90s and the early 2000s on the computer, because the Mac, I was a big Mac guy back then, and instead of coming bundled with Solitaire and Free Cell or whatever, all Macs came bundled with chess, and it was a pretty good chess game. I mean, chess is chess. Who are we kidding here? But the board was attractive. There were multiple skill levels, and I enjoyed it a lot. I still play a lot of computer chess on chess.com on my phone. Whenever I have some downtime. But I'm one of these people, Neil, that I'll probably play chess my whole life and I'll never get any better at it. I still get beat all the time. I'd love to have one of those chess boards, and maybe you've seen these. I see them on ads on Facebook all the time, which you can tell they're tracking my activity because I'm getting chess ads on Facebook. But they actually have a chess board that I guess has magnets or something underneath it attached to a computer, and the pieces actually move. You move a pawn and then the computer slides a pawn forward. I'd love to have one of those boards just for the novelty of playing against an invisible opponent.
That's really cool. And can you kind of rage quit and flip the board over if you want to?
That's right.
The game on the computer.
Punch my invisible computer opponent in the face for beating me.
Yeah. That's cool. I mean, I've seen a lot of applications of augmented reality and VR as well, where you can play board games against people on the other side of the world. I really like that idea. I really need to try some of these things because it's a slower paced kind of gaming, a nice kind of gaming. So I should get back into that. Anyway, back to this CPU. Is it available? Do we have a price for it? Can I turbocharge my BBC Micro yet? Where are we with it?
As of right now, Jurgen has no plans to turn this into a commercial product. He's one of these hobbyists that makes it clear he is not in it for the money. He likes to tinker, which is cool. We need people like that. But he is actively looking for people to help him with developing versions of this for the Commodore 64 and other 6502 based machines. So I'm guessing that this is a pretty bog standard FPGA chip that you can order, and once you get the chip, you can talk to him about what you need to do to get it up and running. I'm sure he'd be willing to help anybody that wants to get one of these things. He's just not looking to sell them.
I almost wish, I know we talked about the Mega 65 last week, and what a great machine that is. But wouldn't it have been nice if they'd put 100 megahertz 6502 chip in there rather than that FPGA chip? That might have been a nice alternative spec.
Right. Well,
anyway,
at the end of the day, it's still something artificial. It's still an FPGA chip, whether it's simulating a 6502 or something else. So.
The Jurgen's project is FPGA based, is it?
It is.
Oh,
it's an FPGA based 6502.
Okay, so it's pretty much the same thing then. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned the BBC Micro, and actually, joking aside, the BBC Micro would be a good candidate because it's got that tube expansion port on the bottom, or the BBC Master for that fact. And that tube interface is specifically designed for secondary processors. So you used to be able to buy another 6502 or even a Z80 processor, and it's the interface that the first ARM CPU was devised on, using the BBC Micro through that interface. So you could plug this into that secondary interface, and it could be a nice way of testing it. It might be a bit redundant if you're a speed freak, because you can already plug a Raspberry Pi into that tube interface and use it as a coprocessor, and do all sorts of fun things with it. I think there's a version of Elite out there which runs blisteringly fast, on a BBC Micro using a Pi to accelerate it, which is great fun. But this might be a fun way to test out the new CPU without having to take one out of the main system. In fact, I would be happy to volunteer myself to test that out, Jürgen, if I can help.
You might be hearing from him, Neil. If you're interested in reading more about this project and communicating with Jürgen, make sure you click the link in the show notes. And we want to thank subreddit user Silver Rapid for sharing this story with us.
So our next story ties in nicely with the earlier SCUMM VM story. It comes another circuitous route via Indie Retro News this time into our subreddit. And it's all about a brand new game being developed by a Sierra superfan. And it's named, now correct me if I'm not pronouncing this right, John, is it Tachyon Dreams?
That's exactly right.
Tachyon, Tachyon Dreams. Do we know what tachyon means?
That's a Star Trek word, Neil.
Oh, is it?
Tachyon impulse. There's something I can definitely hear O'Brien saying something about the tachyon ray or something. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
I've looked it up. Tachyon, a hypothetical particle that travels faster than light.
Bam.
Now we know. So this is an adventure game which is very much in the style of those early Sierra adventure games where you had the graphics and you had the animation happening on the screen, but you would steer the character about with your keyboard and you'd use a text parser to type commands like use key on door. You actually have to type that out rather than clicking on a key and clicking on a door. And it was the next step along from text-only adventures, if you like, that came before them. And then after that, we started to get the mouse as a standard peripheral on a lot of machines, and therefore point and click became pretty standard. It's a game that's episodic in nature, keeps each episode to about 45 minutes of gameplay. I mean, this is a pretty small team working on this, so that they're aiming for a quality first product rather than quantity. So episode 1 is called Tachyon Dreams 1, The Radiant Fish of the Apocalypse. And you play the role of Dodger the dishwasher on the Penrose Interstellar Space Station, which makes for an interesting acronym. No,
it's all very Douglas Adams-esque.
It is, and obviously heavily inspired by Space Quest as well, and the humor from those games too. So it's Sierra in style. It says it includes 45 minutes of gameplay in the first episode, but we know, or at least to me, a Sierra minute is not the same as a normal minute. So 45 minutes, about an hour into the game, I was still sitting on 25 out of 32 points trying to figure out what to do. I had a spongy sliced mushroom. I had a seed that I'd extracted from a berry. I won't give any spoilers as to how I did that, because you guys should definitely go and play this game. So it's just like old times, I did get stuck. But the funny thing is, I went on Twitter and reached out to the developer and said, I've got this sliced mushroom. I'm a bit stuck. And he gave me a really useful clue without giving too much away that helped me to progress.
Oh, so that's fantastic.
That was a really nice bit of interaction. I enjoyed that. I didn't even have to phone the 50p a minute hotline to get help. So, John, I've said what I think this game reminds me of. What's the kind of vibe that you get from this game?
Yeah, it's definitely that King's Quest, Police Quest, Space Quest vibe here. Definitely more of a Sierra influence, at least in my mind, than a LucasArts influence. So these early EGA graphics. I love the art style of these games. This was the era where I was most into point and click adventure games. And even though there's no pointing and clicking here, this is cursoring and typing adventure games. I'm glad they went this route. It's definitely more of an Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade rather than the brown gradient fest of the Fate of Atlantis.
Yeah, those EGA graphics, lots of purples and magentas and dithering, but they still managed to make it work. Whoever's done the art on this is certainly very talented. They really nailed that Sierra look. Even the way the characters move about. If this was released back in the day, I imagine they would get a court case slapped on them for being so like the Sierra games.
Maybe
really,
so.
really is. Yeah, and it's not using the old AGI interpreter of the Sierra days. They have used modern tools to make this. they've just absolutely nailed the look. From you've got the bar at the top with the number of points, and you can press Alt to drop down different menu items. The sprites, even the way that the main character walks about, you know, the gait of his walk, and the double width pixels that they've used to do the art, it just looks fantastic. They've absolutely nailed the look. And I did get over the bit I was stuck in. I did complete the game. I really enjoyed it, and they've nailed it. They've absolutely nailed it. This will make you instantly nostalgia for those old Sierra games. So do go and check it out. You can download it for free, and there's a name your price option when you do download it. So you can reward the creator, who goes by the name of Cosmic Void, or download it for free and just make sure you go back and chuck some coins in the pot, because he has promised more richer and longer episodes if support is there. If the audience is there, if people want it, then he will spend the time doing it, and I really hope he does, because I want episode 2 right now. So go and try it out and let us know what you think on our subreddit. We've got a feature list here, John, which I'm going to read out to you. The game features text parser. This is taken from the website. Text parser, type your commands. Colorful, low-res, pixel-wide EGA graphics. Humor. Time travel. And play as a dishwasher on board a space station.
It's like they read my mind. What do you want out of a video game?
Exactly. I think it's fantastic. So between SCUMM VM's latest release and Tachyon Dreams here, you've absolutely got your adventure gaming fix for the month. So go and try them out, and remember to support the projects.
Neil, when you think about the VIC-20, what comes to mind?
Oh, the VIC-20. Do you want an honest answer from me, John?
Absolutely.
Okay, but please don't hate me when I say this. The VIC-20 is one of those machines where I think, yeah, that's great, but give me a C64. I know the VIC-20 is an important machine. It's kind of like the ZX Spectrum over here in terms of helping to bring the cost of computing down. Am I right? It really drove that down in the US. Mm-hmm. It tried to make it more accessible to folk. It was available outside of specialist computer stores. You could pick it up in a lot of just general retail stores. So It really helped to drive, it makes me think of the way it helped to drive computer sales and get computers into the home in the US. But, everything about it just makes me want to take it all up a step to the level of the C64 and enjoy all the capabilities of that machine. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm just not massively nostalgic for that particular system and I need to explore it more. But
yeah, I mean,
I'm just being honest with you, John.
Well, I feel the same way. I feel exactly the same way. For me, this is sort of the computer that time forgot. The C64, loomed so large in stature and in sales. It's easy to forget that its predecessor, the VIC, it was the first computer ever to sell in excess of 1 million units. And according to sources online, it actually sold above the 3 million mark over the course of its life. So it was hardly a flop, unless you compare it to the C64 that came after it, which, of course, one of the best-selling computers of all time. And, of course, who can forget the VIC's ad campaign featuring the one and only William Shatner, who, of course, was in the news again this past week as the 90-year-old was hurtled into space on a Blue Origin rocket.
Did you watch it, John? Did you watch him go
I did. Yeah. I enjoyed it tremendously. And now I guess him and Takai are involved in some sort of a war of words. And it's caused all kinds of drama in the Star Trek community, which is brings joy to my heart.
I haven't seen that. What are they warring about?
George said, well, I think he was making a comment in jest, and I have a feeling that both of these guys are doing this in good humor. But Takai said, oh yeah, they needed an old geezer as a hamster to test what goes on in space with an old guy. It's one of those things, but it's all in good fun. And of course, just like Bill Shatner, the VIC-20 is in the news again this week as well. Now, Neil, if you were to rank the top 3 most iconic British 8-bit platformers, Chuckie Egg would have to be in there, wouldn't you say?
I think so, yeah. Good old Henhouse Harry in Chuckie Egg. He made it onto pretty much every platform, didn't he? And he did it well. There were lots and lots of great ports of that game.
Yeah. I mean, to me, if I was going to name the top 3 8-bit British platformers, it would be the list writes itself: Dizzy, Chuckie Egg, Manic Miner. That's it. That's the list. And of course, you include Jet Set Willie with Manic Miner. Same.
Okay,
Same
I was going to ask.
Yeah. So I've got to say, of the three, Nigel Alderton's game, Chuckie Egg, is the one on the list I find myself coming back to time after time. There's just something about the simple but addictive gameplay that makes this game incredibly hard to put down, and it lacks the frustration factor found in Manic Miner and those awkward platforming sections in the Dizzy games. But anyway, amazingly, although appearing on seemingly every micro from its original incarnation developed for the Specky, the Beeb, and the Dragon, all the way up through a pretty horrendous port on the Amiga and I think the ST, the Chuckster, Neil, never made an appearance on the VIC-20.
Until now? Are you going to say it?
Until now. How did you know, Neil? That's right. Thanks to the efforts of a coder known enigmatically as Derek, Chuckie Egg has made its way onto the VIC by way of the online C64 magazine called Reset 64. I wasn't aware of this magazine, but it's pretty cool. It's basically, a combination of text and games that's delivered online. It's almost like one of those old Spectrum tape magazines. Did you ever see those, Neil, where it was a tape you put into your Spectrum? It had games, but it also had text on it too?
Yeah, and we got disc magazines on the Amiga as well that sometimes had a little demo in there. Yeah, they were great sources of information. Yeah.
Again, these are things that I don't think we had any of this kind of stuff in the US. Just another example of how like the periodical scene, whether digital or paper, was so much more developed in the UK than it was in the States. But anyway, comparing this version to the originals, I'd say that the VIC version is most closely resembles the BBC Micro version. And to me, that's great news because that's the sweet spot. I think most folks out there would agree that it's the best version all around. Now, Neil, were you a big Chuckie Egg fan back in the day, or did you discover it after the fact?
I can hear the ZX Spectrum fans of this game screaming at you after that last statement. I played it to death on my Amstrad, and one of the most devastating moments of my gaming life, John, is when I played a particularly vigorous game of Chuckie Egg on the CPC, and in a fit of chicken-induced rage, because this game could be frustrating in the context of those other games that you mentioned. Yes, less frustrating, but it could still be a frustrating game.
Yeah.
And in that frustration, I knocked over a pint of banana Nesquik milkshake onto the computer.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it hit exactly where the cassette deck was, and it went all over the computer and all over the Chuckie Egg tape.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a bad time. My computer was confiscated by my dad. The tape was put high up in a cupboard where I couldn't reach it. And in time, the computer was sorted. I don't know if my dad just kind of rinsed it out and let it dry, or if he took it to someone to get it fixed. But whatever he did, it felt like an age before I got that thing back. And I did get it back, and it was working, thankfully. And then eventually one day when my parents were out, I climbed up to that cupboard and I reached that Chuckie Egg tape and got it down. And to my amazement, it still worked. It was absolutely fine. And I was collecting eggs all over again. So in terms of different ports, I know the ZX Spectrum port gets a lot of love. For me, it's the Amstrad, and that's purely because of the one that I played the most. So it's got that nostalgia factor for me. The BBC Micro, you mentioned, is rated as a really high quality port. I would say just don't play it on the Atari ST or the Commodore Amiga. I don't know if you played those versions. We're into 16-bit territory now.
Horrible.
But
horrible.
Henhouse Harry has become an egg. For some reason, you're an egg with a baseball cap and little arms running around. It's almost like they've taken inspiration from Dizzy. But why would an egg be in a hen house collecting other eggs?
Maybe he's trying to rescue his brothers and sisters. Who knows?
Maybe. How does this VIC-20 then compare? Because there's some really great competition out there in these other ports. So how's the VIC-20
I really think this is the definitive version of Chuckie Egg. As I've said before, it's got the iconic look of the BBC Micro version. Now, don't get me wrong, the ZX Spectrum version looks good too, but Henhouse Harry is a little bit short and squat in that version. He's not the lean, mean fighting machine that he is in the BBC Micro version. Of course, we're talking about like an 8-bit stack of pixels, or an 8-pixel high stack, sprite. So there's not much variation there. But the thing that this has got over the BBC Micro version is that there there's not as much flicker. And I'm sure it's because of the programmers just know so much more about the innards of these machines. They know how to get the best out of them more than the programmers did back in the day, just because they're standing on the shoulders of giants, as we talk about all the time. So it runs smooth as silk. Everybody should try this version out, Neil. I recommend it without hesitation.
On the topic of different versions, I think it was last month issue of Retro Gamer magazine. If you read that, they had a whole section on Chuckie Egg and screenshots of all the different versions. And it's funny, isn't it, how in some versions Henhouse Harry is like double the width of other versions, or really squat, or it's funny how each machine, obviously they had to play to their own strengths and their different graphical capabilities, but some of them just look plain wrong. And then, as I mentioned, you get into the 16 bits and it's just horrible. And Chuckie Egg 2, I don't know if you ever played Chuckie Egg 2, but I actually really quite enjoyed that one on the Amiga. And that's much more a Jet Set Willy style flick screen adventure, where you start outside and you have to go into the chocolate factory. I think they're making chocolate eggs in this one, and collect lots of items, and it's a huge game to explore, but a completely different game. So don't expect more of the same in Chuckie Egg 2, but I kind of enjoyed it.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, but I still go back to the first one for a quick pick up and play arcade style experience. It works well for that. So obviously I like Chuckie Egg, you like Chuckie Egg, but if you really love Chuckie Egg, John, I mean, like really, really love it, the intellectual property is for sale right now. There's an auction that's up that ends on the 30th of October, and the bidding is currently sitting at $12,500 US. So consider that next time you're looking at that $1 million boxed copy, the water graded $1 million boxed copy of of Mario 64. Wouldn't it be cooler to actually own the IP of Chuckie Egg?
Yeah, and I mean, it's about 1/10 of the price, so you should definitely jump out, or maybe 1% of the price if it sells for $1 million.
There's that maths teacher coming out.
Yeah. I should just stop. I should stop doing math stuff. It's cheap, Neil. It's darn cheap. This is an interesting site. I'm clicking on your link here. This Elite Systems.auction. This is a site that proposes itself to be an eBay for game IP. I was not aware that such a site existed. Thanks for sharing this, Neil.
Elite Systems was a publisher back in the day, John. I don't know if you remember Elite
Systems.
Yeah,
absolutely. We played a ton of their games.
Yeah, they released games like Commando on the Commodore 64 and things like that, and quite an iconic logo. And I think the guy behind it now is still the same guy as was behind it back in the day. Steve Wilcox, I think that's his name.
Elite was known as one of the first publishers to actually go over to Japan and pick up, on the cheap, a bunch of licenses before people really thought that it was a good idea to do that. And there was a write-up in Retro Gamer about how they picked up, and I think they also, their first game was that ZX Spectrum helicopter game, something like Blue Thunder or something like that. So a company with a rich history.
So that's how they ended up publishing things like Bomb Jack. They must have managed to get those on their Japanese excursions.
Right.
But the auction itself for Chuckie Egg is, I think, looking at the link, on the behalf of Nigel Alderton, the original IP owner and creator. So hopefully that's money in his pocket. I wonder how high it will go. Well,
maybe he's retiring soon. He's looking to build that nest egg. Ba-doom.
Oh, God. I can't follow that up. Carry on, John. You've killed me. I can't.
So before you run out and load this up on your VIC, you got to have the 32K RAM expansion. So open it up, make sure you got that slotted in. But once you've secured that, feel free to fire it up. It also will run on the mini VIC that Retro Games released a few years ago, that mini VIC console, or of course your favorite VIC emulator. Can't wait to play this some more. Stop what you're doing. Grab it right now for free from Reset 64's itch.io page linked in the show notes. And thank you to subreddit user Oz RetroComp for sharing this story with us.
But if you do go and win that auction and buy the IP, please don't go and shut this game down.
Yes, please. Good point. All right, Neil, our community question of the week last week was, what should Atari do to salvage their brand? And we got a ton of responses on this one, Neil. And the first one comes from, and of course, we read the top 3 most upvoted responses every week, but we encourage you to check out our subreddit r/thisweekinretro and read all of the responses. Potato Professor says, they should stick to licensing old games and making new games. They should focus on being a software shop and putting together a games development team. Screwing around with hotels, currencies, and poorly conceived game systems shoddily put together with 2-generation-old PC components running Linux is not the way to do it. Boy, he buries the new VCS. It's more of an embarrassment than anything else. He says if they really want to get back into hardware, they should release a mini Atari system on FPGA. Contract out the hardware development work, loop in the Atari community and past Atari developers and engineers, make an actual Atari with a cartridge slot, SD card slot, HDMI port, and USB ports. And another option would be to re-release Atari games on modern systems and sell a custom Atari controller to go with it.
I mean, I agree with pretty much all of that, John. The only thing, when it comes to re-releasing Atari consoles, it's been done so many times, hasn't it? You know, the Atari 2600 is just basically down to a single chip now that's been released on mini versions. It's been released on, controllers that you plug straight into your TV. You can play these old Atari games pretty much everywhere. So I don't think there's a need for another Atari 2600 or any of the Atari consoles. I think they need to look ahead. Well, not completely. Yes, tap into those old IPs as we discussed last week and make new versions, but also look ahead to new games. Games. Forget the hardware.
Yeah. 4PNM has posted a very, very long diatribe against Atari. And we're not going to read it all because it's long and it also contains some colorful language. But I encourage you to check it out. But he says the only thing that will change people and consumers' mind is leadership. And he says they need a better CEO. They need to stop their inroads into other areas. I'm trying to sum up here because almost every sentence it contains an expletive, and I don't want to accidentally read one. This is a family-friendly show, Neil. So, like I said, you should check out. I'm just going to tell everybody, go and read 4PNM's. He sounds like he's almost somebody with some insider knowledge on what's going on here. Read his post; it's a good one. He buries Atari, Neil.
I'm disappointed you didn't give Duncan a job with the beep button there. And what's number 3?
All right, number 3, the Gypster. He says, like Commodore, it's done for. There is nothing they can do. So some people think it's over, Neil. Some people think Atari and there's nothing you could do to salvage it. I am not giving up hope on Atari. I feel like they still have the resources to right the ship. It's just a question of whether they want to right the ship or whether they can scratch out a living doing, gaming is a small percentage of their business, and then these other ventures just capitalizing on the goodwill of the Atari brand over the past 40 years. It's all up to their management team and the direction that they want to go. I probably would give them, I don't know if I was going to give them a percentage of, okay, if we look at a company that does right by their users 100% of the time, no video game company is perfect. But I think that the releasing of games like Centipede Recharged, and focusing at least some of their efforts on making high quality premium non-mobile sort of microtransaction games, it's a step in the right direction. I'm not willing to completely write them off yet, but only time will tell.
I think the brand has value. You can tell that just by looking at the iconic Atari logo, and you just feel there's still something there. There's still some value to it. It's still got heft and weight. And I agree with the earlier comment about leadership, focus, and set out the expectation. Tell people what you're about, what you're going to do. And there was a little bit of that from the new CEO last week. It's just he told us he was going to do things that I didn't agree with. So drop all of that and just have a nice clear roadmap and set the expectation. But who knows if we'll ever see that from Atari, John? That's for another day.
Yeah. So anyway, we thank our subreddit community for all of their responses. And this week's community question of the week is, what retro chip would you like to see an FPGA made of? Maybe a Paula. Name your favorite retro chip. What would you like to see a drop-in replacement for? Maybe it's a chip that fails often that, there's a finite supply of, and an FPGA chip could be a solution. So please post your responses in the subreddit, and we'll read the top 3 most upvoted responses on the air next week.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC and John Shawler. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you'd like to support the show, please check out the links to our Patreon and Ko-fi pages in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.